Hey everybody, how's it going? You've heard me talk in the past about how America has a debt problem. And this past week, I've done a lot of reading on multiple articles. I've done a lot of digging into some numbers. And I'm going to include links to a lot of these articles, not all of them, but a lot of them. And I'm also going to include a link to the US debt clock, because that's where I get a lot of my information from as well. Not just the articles, but the debt clock itself. And it tracks in real time the spending that our government is doing. But over this past week, in doing this deep dive in all of these articles and all of these numbers, it's led me to one unavoidable conclusion, and that is that America is bankrupt. I'm probably not the only one to come to this conclusion. You've heard me talk about the fact that America has a major debt problem, and many Americans already know this. But it never ceases to surprise me just how many people either aren't aware of it or think that it's not as big of a problem as what it is. But if you look at it the way I've been looking at it over this past week, America is bankrupt. I mean, we're already bankrupt. We're not going bankrupt, we already are. The first article I want to refer to, I've got a lot of information here that I want to cover. But the first article that I want to cover right here is from the Washington Post. It's been covered by other media sources in the past week and a half. And that is the credit downgrade, the U.S. credit downgrade by Fitch. All right, this one comes from Washington Post. It says, credit downgrade shocks Biden aides as more debt fights loom. This is a really long article, 7 pages long. I'm not going to go over everything in the article, but there are several highlights to it that I want to cover. Let's start with the basics. The Fitch has downgraded the U.S. credit rating from AAA to AA+. Now, this is not the first time this has happened. It's only the second time it has happened, though. The first time it happened was in 2011 under Obama, when there was a fight between Obama and the Republicans to try to rein in the debt and spending. That led to major spending debates. I believe there was actually threats of shutdowns several times. Under Trump, we also had a shutdown for several days because of spending debates. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details about this party versus that party. Let's just say that both parties are spending way more than they need to be. And the simple fact is that Democrats spend more on socialist or social programs, and Republicans complain about that. They want to cut spending. But then when Republicans get into power, they spend more on defense, military, and other things like that. And then all of a sudden, Democrats are concerned about cutting spending. The problem is, the fact is, both parties spend way too much money, and nobody wants to rein in that spending. So, about a week ago, Fitch downgraded the U.S. credit rating from AAA to AA+. This happened back in 2011, so it's not the first time that it's happened, but it is only the second time. Back in 2011, after that downgrade, what information I've been able to gather was that the U.S. was able to regain its AAA rating only after long, strenuous negotiations and efforts to rein in the budget. But according to this article, you know, spending is out of control, and I'm going to get into all of that. So they've downgraded the United States again for the second time again. So after a private meeting with senior Biden aides in July, analysts at Fitch Ratings sent the administration a draft report outlining their assessment of the federal government's credit and asking for corrections and notes. The draft did not say whether the ratings agency would downgrade U.S. credit or not. So, naturally, Biden and his aides were optimistic that their successful handling of debt ceiling standoff this spring meant that a downgrade wouldn't happen. But Fitch did announce a downgrade, and they did so ignoring objections raised by senior Treasury officials. So I'm not going to get into the political aspect of that just yet. What I'm going to say is there's a few lines here and a couple of paragraphs down I want to cover. Yet while it caught the White House by surprise, the decision to downgrade U.S. government debt after the spring showdown reflects Washington's persistent battles over rising federal debt, now projected to approach levels unseen since the end of World War II. Fitch's warnings, echoed by numerous nonpartisan forecasters, found that the national debt has soared and shows no signs of slowing. In justifying its downgrades, the ratings agency highlighted tax cuts and spending increases over the last several decades and argued that it is unlikely Congress will act to rein in the debt before the 2024 presidential election. Skipping down to another paragraph, another highlight I wanted to cover, but many experts say long-term debts, now more than $31 trillion, also loom as a threat to U.S. fiscal health. It remains especially unclear how Congress will resolve funding crises for Social Security and Medicare, two massive government programs that both face automatic cuts starting early in the next decade if no action is taken. And again, while Republicans and Democrats alike have blamed the other party for adding to the debt, lawmakers have shown no appetite for approving measures aimed at large-scale deficit reductions. I really want to point out that last statement. It really hammers home the fact that this is not a Republican issue, this is not a Democrat issue. It's not, I know Republicans all say Democrats spend too much money. Democrats say Republicans spend too much money. The fact is they all do. So this is not a partisan issue. Both parties spend way too much money. Sorry, that's stuff falling on the roof of my shop here. They spend way too much money. They continually add to the debt, and they have shown no interest in reining in that spending or doing any necessary cuts. We avoided a very bad situation with the debt ceiling, but we did not fundamentally address the problems with long-term spending and long-term revenue we have going forward, said G. William Hoagland. All right, so I'm going to skip down several more paragraphs. Again, this is going to be linked, so if you want to spend the time to read the entire article, which I do recommend, you can do so. In a statement on Tuesday announcing this decision, Fitch cited both U.S. political dysfunction and the rising debt burden as reasons to doubt the government's ability to repay all its bills, bringing the rating from AAA to AA+. Fitch pointed to repeated debt limit standoffs and last-minute resolutions. They did, off the record, mention that January 6th issue did play a role in the downgrade, as it underscores domestic divisions that could jeopardize lawmakers' response to fiscal crises. In a way, I can kind of see that, because if a country is so politically divided that it faces massive civil unrest and potentially even a civil war, obviously that's going to take precedence over balancing a budget and cutting spending, obviously. So that is an issue that was brought up during the announcement, although it wasn't included in the written announcement. Also, Fitch pointed to a high and growing debt burden over the next several decades, an outlook buttressed by other bleak predictions about the U.S. government's fiscal trajectory. In June, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office projected that U.S. debt would reach 181% of the nation's total economic output by 2053. The CBO also projected the debt would reach 107% of the nation's gross domestic product by 2029. Rising interest rates, pushed up as the Federal Reserve has tried to fight inflation, will also make payments on future debt more expensive as a line item in the federal budget. Skipping on down, they talk about the 35-day shutdown under Trump. Another shutdown could come this fall, though, as lawmakers are nowhere near agreement on government spending levels for the next fiscal year. So this debt ceiling standoff that we just cleared didn't actually clear anything, because that issue is going to resurface again this fall. So again, we're just kicking the can down the road. We're not actually solving any of the underlying problems. Some economists disputed the idea that rising federal debt poses a constraint on the government's ability to pay its bills. And to me, that is just asinine, because if you look at it from an individual perspective, any individual, if they spend, for example, 5 times what they actually earn in income, there's no doubt you're going to go bankrupt at that rate. It's just a matter of how long can you juggle it, how long can you take out loans to pay off other loans and kick the can down the road, so to speak. But it's only a matter of time before the bill comes due and you're not going to be able to make your payments and you're going to go bankrupt. This next line is a perfect example of why government is so screwed up when it comes to spending. Dean Baker, an ally of the White House, naturally, an economist and an economist at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, naturally a left-leaning think tank. And I'm saying that because what he says is clearly a perfect example of how the left particularly, not only the left, the right does it too, but the left particularly sees no problem in spending money more than you bring in. Again, Dean Baker, ally of the White House and economist at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, a left-leaning think tank, said the idea that we have a problem paying our debt, which is in dollars, and when we print dollars, is ludicrous. Okay, so basically what he's saying is, well, all our debt is in dollars, and since we control the printing press and we can print as much money as we want, it's ludicrous to think that we have a debt problem. How utterly retarded is that statement? That is one of the dumbest statements I've ever seen or heard in my life. It just boggles the mind how that mentality is what's leading our government, leading our country right now. The idea that we have a problem paying our debt, which is in dollars, and when we print dollars, is ludicrous. It shows clearly that they have no true concept of the fact that the more money you print, the less value that money has. Therefore, it takes more of it to pay off the debt or purchase whatever you would have purchased to begin with. So, yeah, there's more here that I would like to cover, but this is going to be a long video because of all these articles, and I'm trying to keep it from being ridiculously long. But keep that last sentence in mind. Keep that last statement in mind, folks. The idea that we have a problem paying our debt, which is in dollars, when we print dollars, is ludicrous. That tells you all you need to know about the mentality of politicians in this country. Now, this next article is from Business Insider. And after I get done with this, I've got some stuff that I want to cover before I go on to the last article. Business Insider. The U.S. government will add $5 billion to its debt pile every single day for the next 10 years, says analyst. Let's think about that for a second. Our debt right now is at the time of the recording, it was at $32 trillion. So imagine adding $5 billion to that debt every single day for the next 10 years. U.S. government debt is forecast to reach $50 trillion by 2033. We're at 32 trillion now. In the next 11 years, we're going to go from 32 trillion to 50 trillion. That's what it's forecast as. I'm going to go on the record here. I'm going to say by 2033, it'll actually be more than that, provided the United States government does not collapse, the economy does not collapse before then. I believe by 2033, this estimate of 50 trillion will overshoot that, based solely on the way that our politicians, our government is spending money. Bank of America's Michael Hartnett broke this down to $5.2 billion every day for the next decade. Using data from the Congressional Budget Office that forecasts government debt will rise from 32.5 trillion now to 50 trillion by 2033. Hartnett broke down into U.S. government debt rising by $5.2 billion every single day for the next 10 years. It's the equivalent of giving every single American citizen $15 each morning, or about half the sum of Jeff Bezos added to his personal fortune on Friday. Per the CBO report, debt will jump from 98% of U.S. gross domestic product. Okay, get this. Our debt will jump from 98% of U.S. GDP to 181% of U.S. GDP by 2053, rivaling ratios seen only during Second World War and the COVID-19 pandemic. Such high and rising debt will slow economic growth, push up interest rates to foreign holders of U.S. debt, and pose significant risks to the fiscal and economic outlook, the CBO statement said. All right, so I've got another article here, but before I get to that, I want to cover some basic numbers, because after I read these articles and a few others, I went to the U.S. debt clock, and I'll include the link below. Be sure to check it out if you've never seen it before. It's a live counting of U.S. spending, and it breaks it down. There's a lot of information in the U.S. debt clock. But last night, I went to the debt clock, and I started looking at numbers. And I'm going to go over a few numbers that I copied down. At the time I was prepping for this video last night, the U.S. national debt was at 32.6, almost $32.7 trillion. Debt per citizen, 97,529. If you take that 32.694 trillion and break it down per citizen, it comes to $97,529 per citizen. Per taxpayer, now, per taxpayer, $253,686. All right, so the debt to GDP ratio, we just covered that, right? They were talking about, let me see if I can find it. I got a lot of notes here, folks, I'm sorry. But as of right now, our debt to GDP, actually, these numbers are contradictive. According to the Business Insider article, 98% of US GDP product right now is debt. But they're expecting it to rise to 181% by 2053, according to the debt clock last night. 2023, the debt to GDP ratio is 119.13%. Now it also gave 3 past dates. In 1960, the debt to GDP ratio was 52.56%. In 1980, it dropped to 34.64%. In 2000, it jumped to 56.79%. 2000, let me read that again. 2000, 56.79%. In 2023, according to the debt clock, the ratio is 119.13%. Again, the U.S. total U.S. debt is 32.7 trillion. We have a tax revenue, annual tax revenue of 4.6 trillion. The interest on our debt, just the interest, is $656.149 billion annually. So just say 656 billion annually. Our largest budget items: Medicare, Medicaid, $1.6 trillion. Social Security, just over 1.3 trillion. Defense, 791 billion. Okay, so I want to stop there because I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you. I want to point out something. Our interest on our debt is 656 billion. We spend on defense 791 billion. We spend almost as much on interest as we do on our defense. We spend twice as much on Social Security as we do the interest to our debt. And a little more than that to Medicare and Medicaid than we do on our debt. All right, so here's some more numbers. You know, if that's not concerning enough, here's some more numbers. People talk about money supply. There's 2 things that normally come up, M1 and M2. M1 consists of coins and currency in circulation, checkable or demand deposits, and traveler's checks. That's liquid cash right now. For each individual, that's basically the cash you have in your pocket, the cash you have in your bank and savings account, and that's what M1 consists of. M2 consists of all of that, plus savings accounts, savings deposits, money market funds. It would also include 401ks, brokerage accounts, things like that, certificates of deposits, and other time deposits. So M1 is just cash. M2 is cash and pretty much everything else that is fairly liquid. In 2000, the M2 supply was just over $4.8 trillion. In the past 23 years, dang, it's hard to believe it's been that long, you know? 2000 doesn't seem that far away. It doesn't seem that long ago when everybody was freaking out about Y2K. Remember that? Some of you might not. But in 2000, the M2 supply was just over 4.8 trillion. Today, the M2 supply is at $20.1 trillion. So that's, in 23 years, we have quadrupled the money supply. And the majority of that has happened in the past 3 to 5 years. The bulk of it happened after the pandemic, or during the pandemic and after. So a little more than 4 times the amount of money is in circulation now than in 2000. That means your cash has 75% less value. Understand that, folks. $100 back in 2000 is the equivalent of $25 now. That's essentially what that means. And the problem is, the more money they print, the more money they spend. They have to print more money to make up for the money that they're spending. That devalues your dollar even further. So that means your money is, even though it's worth 25% of what it was in 2000, it's on a trend to become worth even less over the next few years. The dollar is quickly losing its value. All right, so now that we've established that our spending far outweighs our revenue, so we have about 32 trillion in debt, and we only bring in about 4.6 trillion. So, what was that, 7-8 times? We're spending 7 to 8 times what we're actually bringing in. Good God Almighty. Can you imagine if you managed your household like that? If you looked at your annual paycheck from your job, if your annual salary, and you budgeted your living expenses, say you get, I don't know, let's make it easy, $100,000 a year, if you're fortunate enough to make that much. No, let's go down. Let's say you get $25,000 a year. You're at poverty level, because there's a lot of Americans at that level. You make $25,000 a year, but you're spending $200,000 a year. How long would it take you to go bankrupt? Not very long, would it? You would be bankrupt in a matter of months, if that. So understand that we're only bringing in 4.6 trillion annually, but our debt right now is at 32.7 trillion and growing exponentially. Yeah, America has a debt problem, obviously. But more than that, what that tells me is that America is bankrupt. The only reason we haven't gone bankrupt, the only reason it hasn't officially happened, the only reason we haven't declared bankruptcy is because we hold the keys to the printing press. Our debt is being held in dollars by the rest of the world. The rest of the world are forced to hold U.S. debt in U.S. dollars, and we can print dollars whenever we want to. So if we run short on our interest payment, hit the button, print off how much ever money we need, there we go. We've made our payment. You would have to be a counterfeiter to be able to do that as an individual. And what happens to counterfeiters? That's right, you go to prison. But here's the rub on that. The reset is coming, and this ties into that, because you see the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and there's others, they're all moving to dump the dollar. They're all negotiating behind the scenes to where they can conduct trade and transactions in currency outside of U.S. dollars. See, right now, for the time being, all trade has to be conducted in U.S. dollars. That was set up after World War II to provide stability, but it also gave America a huge economic advantage over every other country. But because of our carelessness with spending, printing money, our lack of budget control, our debt is skyrocketing, our money is losing value at a ridiculous rate. So other countries are very quickly moving to other currencies, so that they don't have to rely on US dollars, so that they don't get stuck with US dollars should our currency collapse. Because if our currency collapse right now and everything is done in dollars, then we immediately cause chaos in every other country. So a collapse here in US dollars means the rest of the world collapses. They don't want to go down with our sinking ship. They see that we're going down. They don't want to be dragged down with us, so they're abandoning ship, so to speak. They're negotiating with each other to conduct trade in other currencies, in rubles, in yen, whatever currency that they choose. China is leading the way in that. Russia is leading the way in that. But all of this is exactly why you hear people talking about the Great Reset. The digital currencies that are coming out. And I'm not talking about cryptocurrencies here. I'm talking about government-issued digital currency. One would be the Fed Now coin that they're talking about, the U.S. government digital currency. They're talking about experimenting with it, studying it, trying to see how it would work, but trust me, they already have the majority of that done. They're just waiting for the right time to implement it. And that, folks, is what the Great Reset is about. Because when that happens, when our dollar loses its value and it collapses, they'll be able to step in with that new digital currency and say, here's this new currency. This is what we have. You can trade your worthless cash in for X amount of digital coins. Now, you won't get an exact match. I mean, if you have $100 in the old currency, the paper, coins, and whatever, you're not going to get $100 in the Fed coin. You might get 25 or 18% or 15% of that in the Fed coin, because they're going to have to make that coin worth so much more than what the paper currency is or what the coins are worth. So anybody stuck with those coins is going to get screwed. You're going to take a major financial hit, except for the people in control, the rich and the elites and the politicals. Those people are smart enough to not have all of their money in cash. What do they have theirs in? Physical gold and silver, real estate, property. They have it in physical, tangible assets that can hold value, that they can trade, or they can sell. That's how they're going to maintain their wealth. But for people that are making $20,000 to $40,000 a year, that are at poverty level right now, we don't have the funds to invest in gold. We don't have the funds to buy up property all over the place to protect our wealth. So when this Great Reset comes, we're going to get hit, and we're going to get hit hard. It's going to hurt people. People are going to suffer. But you know what? All this bad news about this spending, it doesn't end there. I've got more. I got a little bit more. Add to all of that we've sent so far $76.6 billion in aid to Ukraine, in a combination of money for aid, but also our stockpiles of our weapons, which we're depleting for our defense. We're quickly emptying our defense stockpiles. It's going to leave us defenseless, right? But they've also approved $345 million in aid, both money and weapons, from our own stockpiles to Taiwan. So they're bankrupt. Politicians are bankrupting this country. I don't know how to make it any plainer to you folks. If you don't see this coming, it's because you don't understand it, or because you are intentionally choosing not to. And I don't see how Anybody can look at these numbers, hear all this information, hear these numbers, and not understand the gravity of what it all means. America is bankrupt. It's being bankrupted intentionally by the politicians, because when they do that great reset, while all the little folks, all the people at poverty level, you, me, the Joe Blow America, will all suffer. We're all going to lose big time. But the elites, the rich, politicians, they'll all benefit from it. Bankers, they're all going to make a killing off of it. All right, so I was going to cover this next article, but I'm already at 36 minutes. So this video is already too long. So I'll do another one. But I want to really drive this home for you folks. Don't listen to the people on TV that tell you everything's fine, the economy's doing great, Biden is cutting our debt down. We've cut back 1.7 trillion in our debt. That's one of the numbers that they're bragging about. 1.7 out of 32.7 trillion. You know what? That doesn't impress me a bit. Because it has no effect on the end result. 32.7 trillion, 30 trillion, hell, even 29 trillion, we're still bankrupt. In order to save our economy, you would have to cut spending so drastically that it would be so painful, it would probably destroy this country. I don't believe this country is strong enough to survive the necessary spending cuts that would be required to kill that deficit, to kill that debt. So they're not even going to try. They're going to keep kicking the can down the road. They're going to keep telling people it's all okay, we're fine. We're cutting debt by 1 trillion. We're cutting this by this much. We can print this. It'll be okay. It's no big deal. The fact of the matter is that bill is coming, and it's coming very soon. If an individual ran a family budget the way the government is running theirs, we would be completely bankrupt, completely homeless. We would have nothing. We wouldn't even be able to have food to eat. We wouldn't have a roof over our heads. No way to get to work. But somehow, because America has the ability to print the dollars that we're forcing the world to hold our debt in, we think it's okay, and we think we can keep doing this. We can't. The reality is, Judgment Day is coming. To use a biblical term, Judgment Day is coming. This will come due, and it's going to come due very soon. You can't keep running a country on this kind of debt, $32 trillion in debt, with $4.5 trillion in revenue. The rest of the world sees this. They see that we're going bankrupt. They see the great ship of the United States going under. It's like a slowly sinking ship. They see it, and they're like the rats that are abandoning ship, because they don't want to be on this ship when it goes down, because they're going to get sucked down with us. They're abandoning ship. They're buying up gold. Countries are buying gold en masse. They're working with other countries to develop trade agreements where they can trade with each other in currencies outside of the US dollar. They don't want to be tied to us. All of our debt that's held by China, all of our debt that's held by other countries, that's going to come due at some point. They're going to sell this stuff off because it's worthless now, but it's going to be even more worthless later on. Eventually, they're going to sell it all off to get rid of it, and then we're going to be left holding the bill, and we're going to go underwater. Get ready, folks. Do what you need to do to prep. Pay off your debt. It's real simple, folks. Pay off your debt. Stay out of debt. Don't buy anything on debt unless absolutely necessary. Invest in hard, tangible, physical assets that you can hold, that you can easily liquidate, or that provide something for you. That's why so many preppers are into stockpiling foods, growing gardens, raising livestock. These things can produce for you. Planting fruit trees, things like that. Those things will produce for you later on. This is the only thing that you can do. You can't control what this government's doing. And I'm telling you, it's bad now, it's going to get worse later. You think things are expensive now, you think groceries are expensive now, it's going to get worse. I hate to be a fearmonger. And honestly, I don't think it is fear-mongering to try to tell people what is coming, what is really actually happening. You need to look beyond the talking heads on TV that tell you it's okay, it's not as bad as everybody thinks. We can keep doing this and this and this because this is America. We can keep doing this. We have the ability. It won't last forever, folks. And at the speed with which our debt is climbing, inflation is being sticky, countries are ditching the dollar, things are getting more and more uncertain, civil unrest is getting widespread and will be worse. That's going to be worse in the future too. You need to take this seriously and take action. The next article, I've got some other articles I wanted to cover, but I'll cover those in a later video because this is already a long one. I apologize for that. I like to try to keep them short, but there's just no way I could make this a short video. Anyway, sorry to hit you over the head with such a depressing video, but sometimes we need a wake-up call. Sometimes you can't avoid it. And the harsh truth is better than a comfortable lie. So, with that, keep prepping. Don't get complacent. Stay safe, take care of yourselves and others. And until next time, folks, I'll catch you later.